Hey guys, it's Knux and I'm back. It's finally time to finally let it all out and discuss everything there is about Sonic Forces now that it is out. This is a full spoiler analysis, so just getting that out there, there will be spoilers throughout this entire video, so if you care about that kind of stuff, leave now. Anyway, now that we're done with that, where the heck do I even begin with this game? That is the question I'm thinking about right now. This game pretty much ended up being exactly what I thought it would be and somehow completely opposite of my predictions at the same time. If I had to describe Sonic Forces, I would describe it very similar to how I did before it launched, being that it is a game with multiple random ideas for a Sonic game thrown into a mixing bowl. That statement that I've been saying from the start has not changed a tad bit, and in fact, it only got worse in some cases as we got closer to launch. Speaking of launch, this game didn't even launch when it was supposed to. Literally 2 weeks before the release date, not one, but multiple stores decided to break street date and just start flat out selling the game. Now I understand this stuff happens, but how does the whole game leak 2 weeks before like this? But it's unrelated to the overall look into Forces that I'm doing right now. Besides, we have plenty more to analyze and tear apart. So let's jump into looking at this game. Well, I guess if we could start from the beginning. When Sonic Forces was first announced, it was on thin ice with me from the very beginning. I remember watching that long and horrible Sonic 25th anniversary stream and the big anticipation we had in finally seeing the new big Sonic game. Or more in my case, finally seeing the new big core 3D Sonic game. No more absolute disasters or spin-off crap like Sonic Boom. No more experimental crap like Sonic Lost World. Plus, I was already burned out on 2D due to the oversaturation of it before the announcement of these games. And unfortunately, the first reveal we got was Sonic Mania, a 2D 16-bit style game that is meant to cater to the nostalgia of hardcore fans to the Genesis era. And it's funny, I am a big fan of Sonic overall, so this announcement should have had me hype, I know. I mean, as a side game, Mania was cool, but it was not enough to carry the hype of being in a drought of Sonic news for that long. But luckily, it was stated we were still getting an announcement for a 3D Sonic game, only to find out that we got Forces. Now, I've explained it a million times already before, but let me review over why exactly Forces' reveal from the start was very underwhelming. For starters, the trailer definitely started well. It started with Sonic, looking like he was in a more serious setting, in a more epic kind of setting that we would see Sonic in, and not some super colorful, bright world that Sonic doesn't belong in. I'm not saying that Sonic has to be in dark environments all the time, but Sonic's main aspect is that he has cool environments. He's a cool character. And that's a problem I had with the last few Sonic games leading into Forces. But then we have the problem that goes deeper into the trailer. So the first big problem, as you know, is when we see Sonic start, heading towards the city, you can just tell that it's boost gameplay. It was so obvious we were going back to boost gameplay. So that was already something that's, okay. And then, the big kicker that we see is Classic Sonic jumping out. So as soon as I saw Classic Sonic, basically my impression switched to the fact that I assumed that it was going to be Sonic Generations 2, which the devs also wanted to claim otherwise, but it was so obviously not the case, and things only got worse as time moved on. We got the confirmation of Green Hill Zone back for almost no reason at all. And it was funny because at first Sega tried to pass off like, oh, it's not Green Hill Zone, it's an entirely new zone. You see the sand there? Totally a new level. And not only did we know that this was a bunch of crap because we weren't born yesterday, and we knew good and well what zone it was, but Sega later came out and just confirmed it was Green Hill Zone anyway. So I don't know who exactly they were trying to deceive. So when Green Hill Zone got revealed, it had confirmed a fear I had with this game since its initial reveal. Being it wasn't just going to be Generations 2 in the sense that it was going to be Generations with new levels. No, my new fear was that it was going to be literally Generations again, but with slight differences in edits so that it's not obviously noticeable. And more weird things kept going down. See, I initially thought that that was the direction they were going with this game. That it was just going to be Generations 2 and they were going to just repeat more of the same. But there were also some weird, risky things that they threw in here that made no sense. For example, we then got the teaser of this third new character, and my big prediction and fear was that it was going to be Boom Sonic. Yeah, the Sonic from those garbage games and that TV show people say is awesome, but is actually more dull and boring than any other Sonic media I've seen. But this is where the big plot twists with this game really start bursting out. See, my argument for it being Boom Sonic was that Boom Sonic was being heavily promoted even during that time period. There was even a weird concept art where Boom Sonic is running with the current Sonic and the old Sonic, and he's there too. So it made me have this fear that he was definitely going to be the third playable character. But nope. Instead, the third character is a custom hero you can create. Yeah, an OC. And this had me confused and wondering so many possibilities. Like, how does this character play into anything? Like, what does this have to do with anything? Why is a custom character just suddenly here, I guess? This game really felt like it could go any direction at this point, and it got crazier with stuff like announcing the tag team gameplay, where apparently your custom hero can run alongside Sonic now, and Shadow is suddenly a playable character again. Like, all of this just happened so suddenly, it just completely changed the course of this game in my eyes. This game, I gotta be real, this game felt like it was making crap up as it went. The story was making no sense. Suddenly, villains like Chaos are here and Zavok is back for reasons. Like, the characters were making little sense, and probably the worst thing I didn't even see coming. The gameplay was starting to look shaky. This is what had me worried. Because you would think, being what looked like Generations 2, that it would play like Generations, at least be a solid game to play. Oh no, because as we learned in the footage, the early footage, when gameplay started coming out, we began learning that elements from Sonic Generations had actually been nerfed. And this was the point. I saw that something was not right. So with all these signs, all these mix mash elements, and of course the lack of information by Sega, like they were hiding something, I could only come down to one conclusion. This game is definitely setting itself up to at least be very mixed. If any of you actually watch my Sonic Mania versus Sonic Forces video, instead of the people who did watch a little of it, but just went to go cry in the comments immediately because how dare I say anything negative about Sonic or you would see that this all matches up with the predictions and thoughts I held within that video. People love to act like I switch up my opinions as each game releases and duck and cover basically, when really this is the exact crap I had tried warning people about in the first place. Something was clearly not right with Sonic Forces. The entire process and pre-release period was absolute hell. And even though I don't think Mania had the greatest pre-release period of all time either, it was clearly being treated with more confidence by Sega. And that alone spoke to me. So how did Forces turn out? It was mixed, of course. And the reasoning for it being so mixed is no surprise for me. The game is a disorganized rush mess that Sega really pushed out as the next big Sonic game, knowing full and well this entire game was so weakly built. And the proof that even Sega themselves saw the problems is in the fact that just before release, they cut the game's price to $40 instead of $60, knowing good and well this game is not worth $60. So back to that video of mine where I talked about Sonic Mania in comparison to Sonic Forces. Look whose predictions were right. I basically hit the nail right on the head with how the games would do reception-wise. Mania came out to critical acclaim and most people thought it was so great, And in terms of my own impressions, it pretty much was that. I thought it was okay, but it didn't blow me away because it was a 2D Sonic platformer in 2017 with not that many crazy differences. And how did Forces go? It was extremely mixed among the community, just as I said it would be. And how did my thoughts for it go? Well, it was kind of meh, so it went exactly as I predicted. You can even go back to the original video and listen to those thoughts I had right there. And yeah, that's all I have to add. I was right. But now that I've added to that opening and all that stuff, it's clear I'm already in full rant mode almost, so it's time to dive into the analysis and look at Forces itself and cut piece by piece its problems, its missed potential, and other areas. Alright, let's go. Alright, so as usual with these types of videos, we're going to start off with what I think is the most important category when talking about a video game, the gameplay. And through the gameplay alone, you can see how much soul and passion is just lacking. The game has multiple styles, and you would think each one would feel varied in a good way, and one would have something that stands out and makes the wait for this game worth it. But no. Starting off with a style I think should have been most important is Modern Sonic, as we'll call him. Basically, Sonic here, rather than playing like Generations and Unleashed, is more akin to Sonic Colors, where the 3D sections are purely mostly boosts, and there aren't many sections where you get that full 3D control of Sonic. Sonic's boost sections are more automated than ever, and feel like they rarely encourage anything but going forward boosting. Maybe throwing in a homing attack every now and then, but that's about it, which is such a decline from Sonic Generations. And here's my thing. That already isn't saying much because the problems within Modern Sonic's gameplay and Forces outline problems I've had with the boost formula, and have been saying have been problems in the boost formula since it was first introduced. Naturally, the boost formula already had too many restrictions that held it back, but what I liked about Sonic Generations and even Sonic Unleashed is that they had certain ways that they did boosts that were more fun, beyond just pressing a button to win the game. There were extensions like the Lightspeed Dash and the drifting and that air dash and other small things that helped make those games more fun. Well, that's too bad because Sega just decided, all those actual fun elements of Sonic Generations? Let's throw them away in favor of the nerfed and worse boost style of Sonic Colors. And in terms of Modern Sonic himself, it just feels so brain dead. And some people would argue that this is fine, when in reality, since both in the beginning of Sonic in 2D and 3D, Sonic and the way he played in the game was always an important factor. This idea that Sonic is a series that only needs gameplay where you go fast and not much else is garbage. Speaking of declining in quality from Sonic Generations, guess who somehow plays even worse than he did in Sonic Generations as well? Classic Sonic. The character, the past version of the main character that Sega, Sonic Team, and diehard 2D purists will not let go. It's bad enough that this character is even here in the first place, but on top of that, he's going to come back and play worse than the Genesis era games, worse than he played in Sonic Mania, worse than he played in Generations, the previous game towards this. This character adds nothing gameplay-wise besides being a mockery of the actual quality of 2D Sonic at its finest. Like dang Sega, it was bad enough we know you can barely do 3D properly, but the fact you can't do simple 2D right now is just astounding. So I guess we go to the custom character gameplay, which is also just kind of meh. The custom character is basically Modern Sonic but with no boosting and focusing more on the enemies and platforming. Now you would think that this does sound a little better because this is what I was talking about with Modern Sonic and what he's lacking. But the means to the platforming and enemy killing are through Wisp-Ons, which are basically the Wisp. The Wisp back in a Sonic game yet again with zero explanation because Iizuka has some weird fetish for them, I guess, but really, the custom character felt like he had potential to be built on, at least. The idea of a custom Sonic character relying more so on weapons than any other Sonic character makes sense. The overall concept of how they tried to approach the gameplay doesn't bother me. The problem lies in issues shared across all the gameplay styles. The overall style for all gameplay styles are half-baked and rushed. They're not as good as they could have been because there wasn't any well thought out design with how their gameplay styles differ and work. Like in general, think of the fact that these are our three main heroes. Sonic from the past, and a custom hero. That setup as main heroes in general has no chemistry. You could make it work with the right design and ideas, but both in story and gameplay it makes not much sense sadly. This also applies to the tag team style where it's pretty much just that. Just modern Sonic and the custom hero combining in styles of play, using each other's abilities to get through the stage, which would be cool in a Sonic Heroes sort of way, but it really doesn't get much time to shine due to there being so few tag team stages. And on top of that, you even have the final boss where modern Sonic and the OC team up again, but this time in addition to Classic Sonic. So what does Classic Sonic's addition to the team add? Absolutely nothing, just like how he adds nothing to this game as a whole. Oh, and don't worry, I'm far from done from beating that point in with Classic Sonic. Oh, and I guess I can slip Shadow in here too somewhere. Basically, he's modern Sonic with his one unique element being he has a powered up homing attack. And that's it. I guess it doesn't end the world for me too much because Shadow in the past worked well being mostly a Sonic clone with a few differences. But not only is his gameplay being that boring barely stand him out, his level design in the few stages he has is also pretty weak. Like seriously, who thought the zigzag level design in this was a good idea? But now we touch on the biggest flaw with Sonic Forces by far, and what makes this game so inexcusable. These stages are stupid short. Like, I know that they wanted to go for shorter levels and possibly more stages as a result. That would be fine, if there weren't such few stages as well. If I'm correct, the main campaign has at least over 30 stages, which is a problem because each of these stages are like 2 to 3 minutes, roughly each almost. Maybe 2 to 5 minutes, I'm not sure. Just when you think a stage might go deeper and potentially get cooler, it doesn't. Instead, the stage comes to a screeching end with no satisfactory besides your rank at the end and what clothes you may have unlocked for your OC. And this is by far the saddest part of this game. Again, even in the past, the games at least gave you enough time in a level or stage to where it felt like you got something out of it. With Sonic Forces, these stages are so short, it feels like barely anything happened at all. And it's made worse by the fact that in the actual little gameplay you get, you're either playing annoyingly, frustratingly designed levels, or you're barely playing due to mostly holding down the boost button. The moments where it feels like you may actually do something cool come to a screeching transition into something lame again quickly, or it just abruptly ends altogether. In conclusion, the gameplay in Forces is lazily designed, rushed, and just a mess. Sonic Team just threw a bunch of things into a pot, hoping it would just make a game that satisfied people, when in reality this team should know by now that just rushing up a product, half-baking it, and hoping it does well is stupid. Sega even had the time to put together something decent this time, but they clearly wasted their time doing pointless stuff, clearly not developing on this game. And they waited till the last moments to actually start, putting the stuff we wanted to see in the public. They were clearly hiding things for this game. That's how I knew something was wrong. It just felt like this game was a whole last minute effort. The thing that's salvageable in this game is some ideas and concepts with the OC, but besides that there's nothing else worth saving. And I know that's probably a bold statement to make, there's nothing else worth saving from this game. Well, let's look at it. Modern Sonic Boost gameplay? It's far better in Sonic Generations and in Unleashed, so Sega is better off looking at those games than looking back at Forces in retrospect. Classic Sonic? His gameplay is again some of the worst 2D gameplay in a Sonic game. You're better off playing Mania or some other 2D Sonic. It's time for him to leave the 3D games. especially since even without him, you cram enough rehashing and 2D sections in these games, and the tag team and shadow styles end up not adding much as well due to barely being in the game at all and also suffering from bland design. This was one of the worst Sonic games in terms of gameplay, and the one thing keeping me from saying that it's not exactly rock bottom is that the game isn't broken or a glitch mess like some Sonic games in the past, but it's still so painfully below mediocrity that I do not see how any Sonic fan, be it of 2D, 3D, or whatever, can defend this. So I went in pretty deep detail with the gameplay, and it's time to move on to the next category, being that of presentation. When it comes to the look of Sonic Forces, it just overall is, plain. Like, it doesn't look absolutely terrible, but the way cutscenes are done, and the way that some in-game models are done, are just not up to value and par of a great experience. What hits me the worst about these visuals is that two past Sonic games in the form of Sonic Generations and Sonic Unleashed look way better in so many areas. Sonic Unleashed still being the best a Sonic game has looked in years. Now, in this case, I bring up those two games specifically because they were built in the Hedgehog Engine 1. And Sonic Forces is supposed to be made with a new original engine by Sonic Team known as the Hedgehog Engine 2. But the Hedgehog Engine 2 doesn't even look better than games made by that of the original engine. So what was the point of even making a new one? Like, you mean to tell me the team spent a good amount of this game's time in making this new engine, where it ends up looking inferior to some past Sonic experiences? This is just sad, because what was the point, again, in making a new engine when the old one looks so much better with games like Sonic Unleashed? But I guess in terms of the game itself and how it runs, it's fine and passable, but it's just I can't understand why we can never have a game that looks as good as Sonic Unleashed, which came out in 2008. Like, with Sonic Unleashed, the in-game cutscenes looked just fine. The CGI cutscenes for Sonic Unleashed looked great, and they were stunning, and the overall look of the world in that game was really clean. Meanwhile, with Sonic Forces, the presentation just felt like they were too busy trying to mix together a tad bit of that realistic style with the over-cartooniness of Sonic Lost World, where some things just look plastic and lifeless, like certain things in the background and such. And it just doesn't work. So with that, we segment into the next category, being the world and overall design of the game. So with this world in Forces, the point of the game is that you are trying to take back the world from Dr. Eggman after he's conquered 99% of it. So basically, after the first stage, you would think that from the point Eggman takes over, the environments would look like crazy Eggman-controlled worlds that look terrifying, like Eggman Land in Sonic Unleashed. But really, no, they don't. Besides obviously robots just standing around and doing jack all, you'd almost barely be able to tell Eggman has taken over anything. The environments are about as what you'd expect in a typical Sonic game. And of course there are exceptions like Sunset Heights and a few others, but what is so unique about those zones? So it's a city on fire and a few Death Egg robots are standing around. If anything, in a lot of these zones, it looks like Eggman is more so in the process of taking over them, not actually looking like he already has taken over. This is even shown in Eggman himself, where he feels no different from his usual comedic villain self. He just flies around between worlds when he loses, like he usually does. He doesn't look like he's gotten any more powerful or is in some sort of dictator-like position. It's even worse when you look at the retro stages. What's the big change in the Green Hill Zone to show that Eggman has taken over it? Sand. Apparently sand is a symbol of how evil Eggman can be when he takes over an area. Or how Eggman randomly builds a casino in a forest, which forms the Casino Forest stages. Like, okay then? What's so evil and menacing about any of this? The game's world design is basically whatever the heck Sega could throw up as a stage in the game. None of them have any depth or feeling with them besides a few, and the few new levels in the game that aren't rehashed or half rehashed levels are so bland and feel dull. And you know what makes it worse? It feels like this game barely takes place in varying locations at times. It is absolutely crazy how many times you play Green Hill Zone alone in this game. And if playing Green Hill over and over and over wasn't bad enough, even some cutscenes constantly cut back to taking place in Green Hill Zone. Like, why does so much of this game take place in this zone? Like, at least in stuff like Generations or Mania, you play Green Hill Zone for 2 acts, and that's it. You move on to other stages. But with this game, it is so lazy in how it built its environments. It feels like you're barely on a journey of any kind. Now, on the plus side, I guess, there are reasons in some missions to why we head to certain places, and that element I do like, because it makes it feel like there's a purpose to going to a location, and not just an arcade-style run-through with these levels. But we run through the level, and that's it. None of the levels feel like they leave a lasting impression due to multiple reasons. The level design of a lot of the levels being bland, how short the levels are, the levels having no unique flair or any defining traits, like, in the end, that's what makes Forces' world so weak. And again, the concept of Eggman taking over the world and slowly earning it back doesn't sound bad, but they never go anywhere with it. Like, that's my problem. It feels like, in this world where you're the Resistance slowly trying to get the world back from Eggman, the world that you're winning back has barely changed in the first place, so what exactly are you fighting? What is this big threat, obviously besides the giant robots standing around that don't even look that threatening? I mean, the 16-bit Sonic CD way back then did a better job of creating a feeling of Eggman taking over the world than Forces did. The bad future levels of Sonic CD really do a good job of showing the consequence of Eggman taking over an area and why he is a threat. Forces could have had a similar feeling, where the game feels like it's filled with bad future levels because it is a world ruled by Eggman, but they just cowardly play with the line and never cross it fully. It's once again another Sonic concept wasted due to sloppy execution and lack of ambition at the last moment. And unfortunately, that concept doesn't just fall out in the world part of this, sadly, as we'll come back to it later. And now, before we get into our last few categories, which I think are the biggest devastations of Forces, let's touch on the soundtrack. Now, the soundtrack in Forces has an edge on soundtracks like Lost World and Sonic Boom, in that they aren't generic and lifeless sounding. There's clearly some type of idea where the OST wanted to go. We have the return of vocal themes for some stages, and Infinite is one character who gets a dedicated vocal theme. So these changes are good and interesting, but the problem lies in, once again, a big mistake that has recurred throughout Forces: poor execution. For starters, the instrumentation for almost every song is forgettable or horrible, due to the composers thinking it'd be a good idea to have the main recurring element be this techno synth. It sounds so low quality, it makes the music sound like it was fan-made. This problem extends to a good whole of the soundtrack in terms of Modern Sonic and the Custom Heroes music. The Custom Hero is really the only character with vocals besides Shadow, I guess, and Shadows has vocals only because his stage music is just remixes of old songs that sound okay, I guess. but also very weak in comparison. But here's the thing, Modern Sonic and the Custom Hero do have some songs that sound passable. I like some of the melodies of some of these songs, and even lyrics of some songs are okay. There are songs like Prison Hall, or Aqua Road, or Sunset Heights, and a few others. Those are some songs I like, but the big thing holding it back is that cheap synth sound in every song. For example, in Network Terminal Indoor, that version, the beginning sounds like it's going to start off to a pretty jazzy song. Until the synth kicks in and ruins it. I thought some of the boss themes like Infinite's first two boss fight songs and the last two phases of the final boss were great, but they are played in an underwhelming game where not only is the rest of the music not on par, but the moments that these songs actually play in aren't on par either. But we haven't even touched the worst part of this soundtrack, classic Sonic's music. Like, seriously, what were they thinking? This music is borderline Sonic Chronicles tier almost, and even rivals Sonic 4 for such a bland, ugly sounding sound direction. Like, I understand what they were going for with having the Genesis sound define classic Sonic, but some of these songs are just so bad. It especially makes no sense to me when they could have easily just gotten T. Lopes, who did the Mania soundtrack, or preferably Folk, who did the soundtracks of Sonic before the sequel and after the sequel, and has yet to have his talents realized in an official Sonic game, despite making godlike music. It really feels like we haven't had an original Sonic soundtrack that feels like a good Sonic soundtrack since Sonic in the Black Knight. And then there's that main theme, which had a good instrumentation, but it has such poor vocals in my opinion. That instrumental was clearly not meant to be sang over fully. Also, the name Fist Bump is pure garbage. The post no space version of Fist Bump is a little better, but still not as strong as it could have been. Enough of these poor man composers, and just bring in better composers, both new and old. I want Crush 40 back for crying out loud. I mean, they were right at the 25th anniversary stream. I want to see more T. Lopes. I want folk or funk fiction in an official game. Not whoever these jokers are that put this poor man techno here. Like, it's even worse synth and EDM than when Cash Cash was making Sonic music. And even Cash Cash at times could do something decent. Basically, the soundtrack is a category of forces I do think is mixed. It has potential in some areas and is an absolute failure in others. It's half forgettable and maybe like a few songs are worth going back to daily. Overall, it's just disappointing how far music, the one element of Sonic that was consistently rated positively, has fallen. So now we have finally arrived at our story category. And despite how much I was looking forward to tearing up this part the most, if I gotta be honest, at this point I almost have no energy left to try and destroy every single point in the story. I've already tackled a lot of the problems of it on social media, and other bigger Sonic YouTubers have called out the biggest problems with it already. So really, it just comes down to re-summarizing my points and the biggest problems I had with the story. So here's my thing with story in Sonic. I just want to get out the way that I am no stranger to supporting story in Sonic. Unlike the 2D purists, I actually believe Sonic should have narrative. It is a trait that stands him out from other series, how cool and action-oriented his stories can be. And while yes, we have had many poor stories, and even the best stories of Sonic have flaws, I still think a Sonic game with a good narrative is not a pipe dream. I don't want Sonic to become Mario or other series where he just has one main plot point goal and that's it. Sonic should stay the way he is there. My problem is Forces is not even close to the answer to telling a better Sonic story. It's certainly a little better than the most recent Sonic stories, but there are big flaws. This story, like the rest of the categories in this game, is half-baked. Rather than recap the whole story though, let's give the general plot and then touch on the biggest issues. So basically, Sonic is out to stop Eggman's evil scheme as usual, but Eggman has a new secret weapon in the form of the new villain Infinite. Infinite, using the power of the Phantom Ruby from Sonic Mania, proceeds to defeat Sonic, and as a result, Eggman takes over 99% of the world. So Sonic's friends form a resistance against Eggman and recruit a newbie in the form of your custom character, who basically does all the work for the resistance from that point on. Oh, and Classic Sonic is here too. And that's the basic gist of the plot. Now let's touch on the biggest issues with this story in numbered rapid-fire succession. Number 1. Modern Roger Craig Smith Sonic is still his usual self. I still cannot just get to gripes with this voice actor for Sonic. Not to insult his individual talent or him on a personal level, but it just does not work. Sonic still feels more like a middle-aged man bothered that he has to get out of bed for adventure than a young attitude-filled hedgehog who loves adventure. Number 2. Sonic's friends are less useless this time, but are still useless in the long run. The point of the resistance falls flat due to how most of the work is done by the custom character, and Sonic anyway. It never feels like the resistance does anything. Even in that last scene where they charge and fight together, it feels pointless because in the end, it's Sonic, his past self, and the OC that do all the work from beginning to end. Like take Knuckles for example, who's supposed to be the leader of the resistance. Now that in itself is actually cool, and it makes sense since Sonic and Tails are missing, so naturally he'd be next in line to step up. But his role as leader amounts to him making bad calls or making obvious calls that could have been done by anyone else. Sonic's other friends do a whole lot of nothing too. Just tell rather than show. Like, it'd be cool to actually see a scene of maybe Rouge espionaging or any other character doing something else. They just appear and show up whenever. Like how Omega is out of commission and back suddenly. Tails can't defend himself yet again. Knuckles is a leader but not really. The Chaotix are just there. Amy is there. Silver tries to fight Infinite but doesn't even last a minute before Sonic has to save him. Some of Sonic's friends aren't even here for some reason. Overall, Sonic's friends are still useless. Number 3. The world. It feels like the world has barely changed with Eggman taking over, besides a few extra robots standing around. Besides a few scenes, it doesn't feel like anything has gotten more threatening. Eggman feels no less threatening certainly, which leads to even bigger disappointments later in the story. Number 4. The Phantom Ruby. Despite being made out as so crazy and powerful in Sonic Mania, what it does in this game feels totally different. It feels like the Phantom Ruby was meant to have a bunch of different main powers and purposes, but it just kind of falls on illusions and such and ends up being a boring MacGuffin. Number 5. Infinite. Oh boy, Infinite. You know, the villain that was extremely hyped up and supposed to be one of the best Sonic antagonists in years? He even was the one person in the story that had a theme song. Sure, he had a cool design and possibly cool concept for a power, but in the end, he is a joke. Infinite was extremely cocky after beating just Sonic, and from there becomes so stupid and average as a villain. His backstory basically amounts to him being salty at Shadow beating him and his squad down, as opposed to anything deep or meaningful like Sonic Team was implying. And his endgame? After you beat Infinite in the third underwhelming fight with him, he straight up just flies away. No final fight with him with a super form or anything. He basically gets treated in the end like the Deadly Six did, just a tool for Eggman to use until it came time for the final showdown with Eggman. Number 6. The Other Villains. You know that big villain alliance that was teased to be on Eggman's side during this game? Well, guess what? They're all illusions. Just illusions Infinite made due to that being his power, I guess. And this is baffling because it just shows the false advertising. You never even fight Shadow and Chaos. Chaos was basically in this game for no reason other than Sonic Adventure fanbait, and Shadow was supposed to have his own reasons for fighting, but it just amounts to him being an illusion, and the real Shadow was just there, I guess. And Metal Sonic and Zavok being illusions especially is just pointless. Zavok and the Deadly Six are villains that weren't necessarily dead, but he shouldn't even be here considering he was one of the worst villains in the series. Metal especially makes no sense because even Sonic himself points out Eggman can just produce more Metal Sonic naturally. What's the point of having an illusion of him? They never explain it certainly, so in the end, this villain alliance basically meant nothing. And number 7, Classic Sonic. Easily the biggest blunt of this game in the entire scheme of things. With how much I rag on him, you'd think I'd hate Classic Sonic entirely and everything he stands for, when that's not necessarily the case. I have great respect for the past era of Sonic, but the problem is Sonic Team needs to stop trying to make the classic elements of Sonic relevant in any way possible. Like really, Mania is in a dimension where everything is revolved around the classic era, despite them also acknowledging Generations is still canon, so yeah. This attempt to try and split Sonic into two categories of classic and modern is a bunch of crap. Stop trying to make Classic Sonic his own character, stop trying to make him his own era with his own realm of existence, and get over the nostalgia. Jesus. A big thing I want to also touch is the ending. The biggest fail is definitely the final boss and the ending. The final boss is not a supersonic fight with Infinite, it's just fighting Eggman as he reuses the same final boss from Sonic Colors again. This is the third time this boss has been reused, and even the design as the final boss is similar to the final boss in Sonic Colors. It's extremely lazy. Hell, Supersonic isn't even in the base game, a standard that had been in the base game in almost all the previous games, but now it suddenly isn't. You have to apparently download it. And even the Chaos Emeralds never really amount to anything either, so, like, the finale and the ending basically have nothing of flair at all. There. That's all my major problems of the story covered. Basically, I think it's a bad story due to all of its elements being so half done. However, the reason why I don't want to fully throw this story to the sharks is I think a lot of concept and intention is understandable. Like, the core idea of Eggman taking over 99% of the world and there being a resistance to stop him sounds cool. Infinite, again, as a villain looked good. While he did have an inconsistent and generic at times power, it could have been used better. There are ideas buried here for a good general Sonic story. The problem is, it's all half-baked, and I'm so sick of every Sonic game having elements that are half-done, a point I will reiterate on in a minute. So with all that covered, we finally reached the summary and final verdict. Basically, this game is overall a below mediocrity Sonic game that should have never been hyped as the next big Sonic game. It was clear from the initial reveal Sonic Team never had plans to make 2017 a very dramatic and impactful year for Sonic. We got Sonic Mania, which did do some great things in design, but was held back by Sonic Team playing it safe with nostalgia. Forces here is a half-baked Sonic game that has interesting concepts in areas, such as more story, again, but it overall only goes halfway with the ideas that it has, and the story that we did get basically sucks. And I already know the damage control now, such as people saying I went easier on Sonic Mania, so I must be biased. Well, my friends, it's because Mania is overall a better game. Not because of reasons some other people may think, but because it is a solid game in the long run. It has flaws that keep it far from my ideal 2D Sonic game, as I explained in my review, sure, but it is solid as a game overall. Forces just isn't, and of course the backup defense would be about how it doesn't matter because it's about the story. Well, that could be the case if the story wasn't pure garbage. And I don't see how anyone claiming to be a fan of Sonic having story can say straight up that Forces had a good story. Just doesn't in my eyes. And I can see many other nitpicks of things with this review as a whole, but if that's what you gotta say, then go ahead. Here's my thing. This time, for once, I really do not care. Because Sonic fans right now, more than ever, look embarrassingly sad trying to pick up scraps from this bad game. Sonic fans have to stop accepting mediocrity. I understand Sonic Forces isn't the worst thing, but Jesus. How many times are we going to repeat this, guys? I'm sick of having to look at bad games for Sega to build off of and make up the same stupid defenses. At least it's not bad as insert worst Sonic game here. At least the music is good, even though the music wasn't that good this time. Like, for the love of God, can we just stop with these dumb excuses? It is time to demand better. It's not even really about what I want specifically anymore. Like, even with my clear distaste of the fandom, I know that Sonic fans deserve better than this. I'm mainly complaining because I know I deserve better than this at least. For example, I don't even like the boost formula and have tons of personal problems with it, but Forces isn't even a good boost game. How did they fall lower than Sonic Colors and Sonic Generations in areas? Like, literally at minimum, all they had to do was take Sonic Generations and improve upon it with new concepts, new environments, and all sorts of stuff. Like, the game gameplay-wise at least would have been solid if they at least took what they did with Generations and added to it. Forces doesn't even stack up to Sonic Generations, so I guess one thing I was wrong about was Sonic Forces being Generations 2. It's not even worthy to be Sonic Generations 2. Overall, man, this game is just the exact representation of problems I have with the current direction of Sonic. And then some. But it's not entirely bad. I do think that there is some redeemable quality that can be improved upon, and I do think that this game could be the start of really turning Sonic around, maybe. I mean, if not, then at this point, I don't know what else to say. Alright, well, I think I've torn apart this game long enough. There really isn't anything else I have to add other than the obvious things. The only segment I didn't cover is the future segment, where I talk about what I want to see from this game going forward. But I have decided to make that its own video with some notes from Sonic Mania as well. Other than that, I have nothing more to add. This is Knux, and I'm done. Peace out, guys.